Hello and welcome back to KXAN Plus. I'm sorry about that graphic. Please ignore it. We are not doing Freddy's Weekend Watch. We are actually doing Nick's First Warning Weather with our KXAN meteorologist, Nick Bannin. Nick, this show's going to be a little different. Tell us why.
Because it won't be about Freddy's Weekend Watch is
True.
what it's about.
True.
Freddy is, of course, always monitoring the weekend and the week for that matter. But today we're going to talk about La Niña. And we're going to bring in our own meteorologist, Tommy House, to help talk about this as well. Tommy, good to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us today.
Nick, my man, happy to be here. And I'm looking forward to talking about this La Niña because it's something that is pretty recent that the weather community is talking about.
Yeah, and we had a La Niña winter last winter, and we'll talk about what that usually means and how it actually impacted us last winter. But just within the last week, the Climate Prediction Center released their updated outlook for ENSO, and ENSO stands for El Niño-Southern Oscillation, and that's the climate pattern largely impacted by the water temperatures in the eastern equatorial Pacific. They can have an impact on our weather throughout the year, but especially during certain times of the year, that connection is a little stronger, right?
I know you mentioned in your blog too, La Niña Watch. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, La Niña Watch, and that brings us to the first graphic. La Niña Watch is basically what the Climate Prediction Center and NOAA issue when La Niña is starting to be more favorable, not now, but in the months to come. And you need certain things to happen in order for a La Niña to be deemed on the way. And that means 3 consecutive 3-month overlapping seasons where La Niña is favored. And that brings us to this. And Esme, I don't know if you can bring this full screen because the bars are a little harder to see when they're small like that. Thank you very much. But you can see here, as we pull up the map, the odds of La Niña in the blue boxes here. Pretty low now, and you can see these 3-month seasons of overlapping months. JAS is July, August, September, where ENSO neutral is favored by a large margin. In fact, that's what we're in now. But then as we get into ASO, August, September, October. And remember, these 3-month increments overlap. Then we start to see a big increase in the odds for La Niña, but still ENSO neutral leads the way as far as the likelihood there. And then things start to flip as we get into September, October, November. Now, during this period, La Niña is favored. And I mentioned that you need 3 consecutive 3-month overlapping periods of La Niña being favored to have a La Niña watch and for La Niña to now be expected in this sort of way. And we've got those 3 consecutive 3-month periods. September, October, November, La Niña is favored. October, November, December, La Niña is favored. And November, December, January, La Niña is favored. And then by the time we get into DJF, which was your nickname in college, I think, when you were a DJ at area weddings. Is that right?
I tried a little bit. My mom also DJed in college too, so she kind of has more of the beats.
There you go. But we get to DJF, and then ENSO neutral is favored by then. But you get those 3-month periods for the fall into the early winter where La Niña is favored now.
So during that period, Nick, where the La Niña is favored, what is that big season when we're looking at weather? What's going on that this could impact?
Yeah, so usually we talk about the impacts of either El Niño or La Niña being a winter thing. That's where the strongest connection between those phases of ENSO and our weather here in the North America are connected. So you can draw strong connections between being in one phase and what type of weather we will see. But as we showed you from that bar chart again, a lot of those periods where La Niña is favored are actually in the fall into the early winter too. And there's less connections between what our weather usually happens in the fall when we're in a La Niña or an El Niño. But there are some connections that we can draw. And the primary one is about what happens in the tropics because, as you know, Tommy, our Atlantic hurricane season does continue into the
underway.
fall.
So let's see this graphic full because I want to point out a few different things. One of them, of course, being out in that main development region, more hurricanes because of that weaker wind shear. Wind shear, of course, is when wind changes with correlation to height.
Yeah, and this is during a typical La Niña hurricane season. These are the impacts that we can usually see. And I know you and I were talking last week, Tommy, about the National Hurricane Center and NOAA updating their hurricane
Right.
outlook for the rest of the season, and it remained unchanged. They're still expecting it to be a busier than average season by a little bit, even though we've had a fairly average season so far by amounts. And probably at least some of the reason is this, that toward the end of the season, middle and end of the season, things may end up being a little busier than normal because of the lack of the wind shear. They're helping to keep storms alive a little bit longer or help with their development in the first place.
Exactly, especially the Eastern Atlantic, right? Remember, Aaron tropical storm was fighting that dusty, dry air, started to enter more of a favorable environment. But now we're seeing if this does pan out during the fall months, that could be a little bit more of a environment for some rapid intensification and even some strong hurricanes out there.
Yeah, so back to the chart again. You can see when the periods are that La Nina is favored: September, October, November, December, and November, December, January. But for meteorological winter, DJF, which is our meteorologists all over the world, we consider our seasons in these whole month chunks. ENSO neutral is favored by a little bit. So you can take that to mean that we're looking at La Nina in the fall and into at least the beginning of winter, but maybe not the whole winter. So if La Nina is impacting us in at least a part of the winter time, call it, let's say, the first 1 or 2 months out of the 3-month season, we typically see, on average, drier than normal conditions in the southern tier of the U.S., including here in Texas, and also warmer than normal conditions in the winter too. But it doesn't mean that we don't get any cold weather.
Yeah, and you mentioned this too, right? That jet stream, the polar jet stream, very important for funneling in some polar, even Arctic air. So even in this La Nina, we could still see some Arctic outbreaks, right?
Yeah, and in fact, because of the much colder than normal air that usually sits in the northern tier states, that colder air in those spots does still have the potential to come down even for shorter increments, rather than it being a cooler than normal season overall in El Nino winters. You can get those even colder plunges during La Nina winters that are still warmer than normal, but they don't always follow the typical trend. Last winter was, by a textbook case, a weak La Nina, but the atmospheric connection showed more of a moderate La Nina, and it did bring us at least some of our usual conditions, but not all of them. We were drier than normal for the season as a whole, December through February. We missed out on a little under 2.5 inches of rain, but our temperatures did not follow a typical La Nina winter.
So you could say with a little bit of a weaker La Nina that it's more precipitation versus temperature when we're looking at that dryness.
Yeah, and that's certainly a possibility too, although the more you break it down, the fewer La Nina cases that we've been able to study that we're able to draw those connections. Remember what a typical winter is like here in Central Texas. We have average temperatures in the mid-60s in December, low 60s in January, and then our average high temperatures start to climb in February. So our coldest month is usually January. We'll have to see whether that La Nina manages to hang on into January or whether it's already falling apart. And remember, just going back to the odds again, this is by no means a guarantee that we're looking at La Nina this winter. Right. We're in a La Niña Watch, which means La Nina is favored for those 3 consecutive 3-month seasons, but it doesn't mean that it's a foregone conclusion that we're looking for La Nina this winter or even in the fall. But it is sort of leaning in that direction. And previous updates that we've talked about here on this program had favored ENSO neutral here for a couple of months in a row. That was the way it was leaning. In fact, maybe even longer than that. So this is a more recent development that now ENSO neutral looks like the second most likely feature of the fall into the winter, and that La Nina is more favored. And of course, as we get closer, we get a better idea.
And one of those things that stuck out too is even if this La Nina does happen, the percent chance right now is maybe 40 to 60% at most. So more overall of a neutral, slightly La Nina. What about the precipitation during those winter months? How does that correlate with temperature?
Yeah, so typically this is what we see as far as precipitation in an average winter. December, 2.72 inches of rain. January gets a little drier. And then February, actually our driest month of the year. And this is for an average winter. So considering we're slapping on the La Nina tag for at least part of the winter, it could make it even drier than this. Now, we're not as desperate for rain as we were going into last winter, so it's not as dire of a situation that the drought's going to get exponentially terrible going into this winter, given some of the storage that we've managed to lock up in Lake Buchanan and most of Lake Travis filling up, but not quite there. But still entering into another drier period here for the wintertime, not necessarily super ideal.
Not necessarily super ideal. And online, your blog, right, you talked about what is a La Nina watch, what's a La Nina, typical continents of the United States, and even Texas impacts, right?
Yeah, so it's got a bit of all of that. We're not able to draw as many conclusions about this coming winter just because the whole winter doesn't necessarily encompass La Nina. It may just be a part of winter, which makes this a little bit more of a unique situation. We had La Nina this past winter. I think the previous winter was El Nino, and then the three before that were La Nina, and many of those were much stronger La Ninas than the one that we had last winter and the one that we're expecting this time. So, each situation is different. Each winter is different. Even each La Nina winter is not exactly the same. So you can only draw so much from these connections, but it does give you a general idea. I did want to bring it back to what's happened this summer, since we've got a little time here, because many of you will think back on the summer and think it was a wet summer and it was a cooler summer. And certainly we have not had that many triple digits. But I put together some of these numbers yesterday, looking at the departure from average of rainfall in June and temperatures in June, and then I took it through July and what we've had through August so far. You can see June was drier than normal. We missed out on almost 3 inches of rain. July, way wetter than normal. Of course, we had the floods at the beginning of the month there. And then August, back to being drier than normal again, even though we do have rain in our forecast here today and the next few days. Temperatures, we had that up and down variation too. June was almost 2 degrees warmer than normal. July was almost 2 degrees below normal, so those basically canceled out. And then we've had a warmer than normal August, even though we haven't had a lot of triple digits. You and I were talking today about the abundance of a lot of 99s.
A lot of 99s. Last time I checked, last week, we were in that top 3 ranking for the most amount of 99-degree days. Of course, most of y'all just care about the triple digits, but even looking back to July, overall cooler, but some of those overnight lows were very mild and warm from the clouds and the rain.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you get a lot of rain is you don't see those high temperatures in the afternoon necessarily getting so high, but with all the moisture in the soil that then works its way into the air, you end up with a lot of very humid days, even if the air temperatures don't get as hot. So it might go down in the record books as being a summer that did not have as many triple digits as normal, or at least as many as some of our previous years. But it was still a very humid summer.
Yeah.
And in fact, when I put all of this together, and remember, we're not done with summer yet. Meteorological summer here still has about a week and a half left to go. But if things ended now, we will have ended summer above normal by almost half a degree and drier than normal by almost an inch. So despite that incredibly wet and in some places historically wet and terribly wet beginning to July, it did not make up for how dry June was and how dry August has been.
Right.
And from a temperature perspective, June was so hot and August a little warmer than normal too. So, 1-2 week period of really wet weather in the middle and early part of July is really not compensating for what the rest of summer has done.
And let's tease ahead later on today. You'll be tracking some of those warmer temperatures, but the rain could be beneficial, right? Because it could all of a sudden knock our high down. And a few days of showers could hopefully put a dent in that number.
Yeah, and it is certainly possible we could pick up a quick inch of rain over the next week to 10 days, and then it ends up being a wetter than normal summer, right? And if our temperatures come down as we expect that they will, at least temporarily here as we wrap up the week and go into part of the weekend, then we may see the departure from average coming a little closer to normal as well. But yeah, coming up at 4, meteorologist Freddie Vela is going to be tracking the rain and storms. They're already into some of our northern counties now and dropping in from north to south. And then I'll take over at 5 and 6, tracking the rain and storms as they get deeper into the area with the potential for some more rain overnight and into tomorrow and into Friday. So we're not quite done with summer yet, but of course we're always looking ahead. That's what Nick's First Warning is all about, by the way, Tommy, is I'm sure you know. We're trying to jump ahead, not just talk about the week, but the next months, the next seasons. So we're now getting a little bit of a taste about what fall and winter could bring.
Always good to be prepared. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And as you mentioned, on KXAN.com, under the weather and traffic section is where our weather blogs land and where we update them throughout the week. Not just myself, but our whole team dives into blogs of all sorts here. And you can look at not just what that La Niña Watch means again, but some of the expectations for the changing in the phase of ENSO neutral or La Niña or El Nino even, and the odds for that as we go through the next several months. Those are all on KXAN.com, Esme.
Well, thank you both for joining us here on KXAN Plus. It was a pleasure to have you on with us, Tommy, and we will see you both next week.
Thanks.
Awesome.